Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Mentor Moments podcast. My name is Braden Wooters, and I'm joined by our co-host, Dr. Michael Keener. On Mentor Moments, we take the time to interview counseling professionals and personal mentors. As you know, this season we've been chatting a lot about leadership, technology, career development, and just counseling as a profession. We hope you enjoy this episode and keep tuning in to Mentor Moments.
On this very special episode of Mentor Moments, we have Kristi Hammond.
Kristi is the Director of Counseling Services for Youth in Need. On today's episode, we have Kristi Hammond. I have known Kristi for, a little over 2 years now, I think. Our listeners don't know you, though, or they might not know. Maybe they already do. Who knows? Tell us a little bit about who you are, your professional journey. How did you start? Where have you been, and what are you doing now?
Sure, yeah. Like Brayton said, my name's Kristi Hammond. My pronouns are she, her. I am currently a director of counseling services at Youth in Need. And how I got here, I don't even know where to start. I moved to the United States to play softball in college and came as an athlete and kind of figured out the academic piece along the way. For a long time, I really wanted to go into teaching, and I loved math and kind of the analytical side of things, figuring out problems. And then during undergrad, took, that Psych 101 class, kind of fell in love with the social services and ended up pursuing a degree in psychology and then my master's in professional counseling. My first graduate school closed after a semester, so they transferred us all to Lindenwood, and Lindenwood connected me to Youth in Need. And so I had the opportunity to do my internship here. I got hired on as a school-based child, youth, and family therapist, spent a couple years doing that, and then transitioned into our runaway and homeless youth programs as an associate director. Worked over our emergency shelter and transitional living group home for almost 4 years. And then 2 years ago, transitioned back into the counseling department. And here I am.
Well, Kristi, I want to know more about softball. Where did you come from? Where did you play? What position?
Right. Yeah. I was a catcher. I grew up in British Columbia. Yeah. I grew up on an island off the west coast of BC. So Vancouver Island in Victoria is home for me. I moved to St. Louis about 10 years ago. Actually, this month, it was a decade ago, I moved to St. Louis, and this is where my husband and his family's from. So.
What do you miss most about Canada, right? I mean,
family, absolutely my family. The mountains, the trees, all sorts of things, yeah.
Well, glad you made it to St. Louis.
And so currently, Kristi is my supervisor over at Youth in Need. You've already mentioned a couple of those pivotal moments, right? That kind of led you to where you are now, like a grad school closing and like big moves. On top of those, were there any other big pivotal moments that like really shaped kind of your trajectory?
I don't know. Yes and no. I feel like with my career where I'm at right now, I feel like I have found a place that I can learn and grow and challenge myself with work, and that I get to wear many hats every single day. And so I think I've learned that while I love to direct therapy, direct client work, frontline work, I love supporting staff just as much. And I grew up, with family businesses and that side of things where you get to see what it takes to operate a business. And so I feel like I have that blend right now of both programmatic and clinical in my day-to-day. I don't even know if I'm answering your question, but it's just these pivotal moments happen more than we realize. And it's not until you get a chance to really look back and reflect that you realize that did change things. For the longest time, I wanted to be a marine biologist, and I didn't think I'd ever leave the island. And then sports brought me to the States, and I've lived in Texas and Kansas and North Dakota and now Missouri. And the Midwest is well ventured, but I miss the Pacific Northwest too, just geographically, culturally, all sorts of things.
Yeah, the small business piece automatically made me think of you, Dr. Keener, and like your like growing up with your family and that experience too. So
Well, yeah, and that's what I was going to lead to this next question. So sort of being part of a small business or a family of small business, you sort of like, if you don't make a sale, you don't have money. And so you really sort of, I don't know, I guess the attributes of the quality. So what did you learn from that experience with your family that maybe makes you effective today?
It takes a lot of time and energy to have success, and success looks so different. I think I had the fortunate opportunity to see both my grandmothers really involved in the family business side of things, and then my mom and my aunt, in a male-dominated industry. My mom's side of the family had a Subaru dealership, and my mom ran the service department. She sat on the board of Subaru Canada, and she taught me, if you don't treat your staff well, they're not going to treat your clients well, your customers well. And so that was modeled for me at a really, really young age. We have a bunch of cousins. We all kind of grew up through the family business and kind of seeing the time, the energy that it takes to be successful. I think just then spending a few years doing the direct service too, and having the opportunity over the last 6 years to see the business side of things at Youth in Need has really allowed me to continue to think about what does it mean to find that balance of running a business and meeting our staff where they're at. I think Youth in Need does a really good job of believing in the power of potential is our tagline, but believing in the power of potential of our staff and being strength-based with our staff so that they can be that way with our clients too. And so best of both worlds in a way.
Yeah. I mean, I like these questions. They just like lean into each other. Yeah. I mean, you're already mentioning like philosophies, models of like leadership. And there's the ones that like we have at Youth in Need that kind of get like baked into the system.
Mm-hmm.
Being somebody who has, as you said, have to wear many hats, are there any other models, philosophies?
I think at the core of what I do every day is the relationship, whether that's an actual model or not. Obviously, it's incorporated into a lot of things, but without relationship, there's no trust, there's no communication. And so I think that you have to build an environment or a culture that can create and sustain relationships that allow for healthy conflict, that allow for discomfort, so that way we can do good work. I think that as an athlete growing up, the supportive coach, the mentor, kind of that drive as a team sport also factors in the transparency, the communication, the trust. I don't know. I think it's a hodgepodge. I was kind of that way as a therapist myself too, of trying to push and pull from different modalities to figure out what works best for me so that I can be authentic in who I am. And I think that applies to my leadership style as it did my clinical work too. So
Yeah, I think you really said it well. Like when we or an agency or a company invests in its people, in theory, then right, the people are going to be more invested in the mission, the values, and doing, as you said, good work. So very much tested philosophy model to again invest in your people, so they'll invest in the mission and the work that they do. I'm also interested, and maybe it's since the pandemic, but I'm sure everything's always evolving and changing and staying current. But maybe again, since the pandemic, we had this dramatic shift to using so much technology and maybe slightly coming back. And now with artificial intelligence. So just in general, how do you stay adaptive as a leader? And what things do you do to stay current?
I think my first response to that question is that I truly believe I am a lifelong learner. Like, I really believe that I want to lean into new concepts and learn new things and challenge myself, whether that's academically or as a leader, for example. I want to learn and grow. Even like right now, I'm really refining my banned book list to read from there, because you can learn from that. I think feedback is a gift, and asking for that. And so right now, even as a leadership team, we're really thinking about the difference between what does it mean to be a leader versus a manager, and how do you hold people accountable. And so I think using my peers, using my colleagues to really process through what that looks like in my day-to-day at work. And then I think there's an expectation that we have to, like, you can't be stagnant, you can't stop. And so we work with humans. things are ever evolving and changing. And I think in COVID and the impact of that, I was still in our runaway and homeless youth programs. We're 24/7, it's crisis support and it's housing for some of the most vulnerable youth. And some of the things that we did to make sure that youth had their basic needs met looked different, but it also paralleled a lot of what we were doing before and are continuing to do after. And in our counseling department, I think if anything, we have expanded upon our current services. We've made them even more low barrier. I think that's one of the things I love about Youth in Need is that we want to screen people into services and instead of out. And so COVID expanded our outreach, expanded our services in some ways too, that those clients with little access to mental health services already now have additional access. If they have access to technology, then that's a whole nother conversation for those that don't have access to technology and some of the disparities that come with that. But it's relearning, it's unlearning old things, and it's trying to do the best you can with what you have in the moment too.
I really like what you said, and I don't know if I'm going to paraphrase it right, but like screening for access versus screening to say no, right? So, I mean, I know that's a huge thing at Maryville too, that like education shouldn't be restrictive, right? It shouldn't be something that we shouldn't be promoting institutions that say we're an 85% rejection institution or only 15% people get in, right? We like, why are we holding knowledge as a, something that everybody shouldn't attain and have? So I appreciate that kind of perspective from you and from Youth in Need.
I'm going to throw a curveball because my brain's going somewhere else. I hope that's okay. And this is more of just a question for everybody, I think. And that's, so Kristi, you brought up how like your leadership comes from a place of like building connection, building that relationship, building that trust. And that's a very therapeutic process, right? That's such a therapist answer. Which builds strength, right? We have an innate strength to do that being therapists. And I'm wondering if being a therapist coming from that lens has ever posed as a challenge or a barrier.
Yes, absolutely. To like summarize it quickly, yes. I think using the skill set that I have to build the relationship I have with our staff, sometimes we're in conflict with, I know what you're struggling with and I can empathize with that. And I also have some accountability to have a conversation around performance, or at Youth in Need is utilization that comes up a lot, and goal setting and things like that. And so there's always this push and pull of, do I have my therapist hat on? Do I have my supervisor hat? I get to wear both at the same time quite often because the work that we do is interpersonal. And so I think that it's through the language that we use and through the transparency of like, hey, this conversation might be hard to hear, but we have to have it. Or, hey, you're doing everything you can and we still have a ways to go with XYZ. And so I think it's trying to look at things from a perspective, and shifting that perspective as a supervisor is challenging at times. And it's a skill in itself too, of how do you do both? How do you hold people accountable to their job expectations and do it in a way that feels mutually respected and mutually for the benefit of that staff and the agency at the same time? And I think, in my journey, I've had supervisors that have done that really, really well. And I've had supervisors that I struggled with personally because their tone of voice or their body language or their approach didn't meet my needs as a staff. And so I've learned what I want and what I don't want. And it's meeting the needs of my staff now and asking them, what is your learning style? What, when I do have to give you feedback or suggestions, how do you want to receive that? And just really getting to know how to set those conversations up for success.
I really appreciate that transparency. And it's rare that I'm able to talk to two people who like have that counseling background, but aren't necessarily like just a therapist or just a counselor. And I was wondering, like Dr. Keener, coming from that area, what is it like teaching?
Like teaching philosophy was always to sort of model how we would do a therapeutic relationship. So I want to build empathy with you and model unconditional positive regard and be student-centered, student directed in that perspective. But then there are the times when, as Kristi was alluding to, you have to set boundaries, or, okay, this was the expectation and this is what you produce. Even, when you're working with peers, when you're evaluating and mentoring at the same time, right? Sometimes I struggle with, maybe they also need other mentors and other people to give evaluations outside of just, because again, that dynamic there. And that you also, I don't know if I'm being clear, but then I ascribe to Bowman and Deal's sort of idea of leadership, and they say there's sort of these 4 frames, and you sort of look at each situation with a frame, like a glass or a window. And as we've been talking about, the human resource is sort of what we've been talking about here, this relationships. The other frame, there's 4 of them, I won't get all of them. The other one to me that I really ascribe to is what they call a symbolic frame, and that's how you make a culture of. So what's the culture of our class or our program or the organization, and what rituals or celebrations do you have? Do you have retreats, or do you have phrases like you're a yinner or whatever, those that type of things, and then just again, like just those things that we do that align us with our mission. So that's the other thing I try to sort of do, be a symbolic leader as well.
Yeah. I can agree with all of those. And shifting gears a little bit, I kind of got off track. That's my bad. Leadership and like mentorship, right? That's the name of our podcast. And so you've already touched on it a little bit. Any role models, any mentors, anyone that's had like a significant impact on your journey?
I've had quite a few, yeah. My very, very first internship supervisor was Sarah. Sarah was such a strong clinician, and she really allowed me to process through situations and learn and grow from her. And through that relationship, and a member on our team was also Ash Winnie. Ash and I have really leaned into the work of, DEI and giving me space and time to process what it meant to move into leadership at Youth in Need. And as a woman, as a white person, what does it mean through a REDI lens, a racial equity lens, talking through systems and situations that came up along my journey as a leader here. And then my current supervisor, Kara, she's been a mentor for me. She was my clinical license supervisor. She's now my supervisor. It's been a full circle moment for me, but working alongside her again has definitely been a blessing for me in my professional journey, that I've been able to lean on her while I was, a newbie to the field, a rookie, and then coming back years later to work alongside her has been very rewarding, to just be able to have thoughtful conversations, challenging conversations, and the trust is there. I think right now, trust is so important to have those crucial conversations of growth. And so leaning into, strong clinicians, women that I admire, and I would definitely call them mentors for me. So shout out to those 3 women.
Again, talking about leadership and maybe being more of this relationship building, did they push you or mentor you or lead you in different ways, or
yeah, definitely very different ways, at different points in my career too. I think I had a lot of background heading into social services with Sarah, and so I've worked in a hospital setting. During undergrad, I worked on a sexual offenders unit in a state penitentiary. I was a graduate assistant during college and got to work with at-risk student athletes and kind of, give back there. But the first couple of years of my career at Youth in Need, I really wanted to absorb as much as I could. And Sarah gave me the permission to kind of explore different components of what I wanted to do. And I think sometimes as, professional counselors, we focus so much on the therapy itself, where in social work, you get to do some more macro work or micro work. And I got to kind of dabble in some different things. And then with Ash, I feel like she's just been such a sounding board for me with anything related to racial equity or diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I feel like having people like that you feel comfortable enough to talk through your decisions or your thought process is so crucial in this work of working with human beings that are all different. And then I think Kara has just been the steady throughout my career. She's always been there to support me. And it's definitely been someone that has just been a constant. And I think at Youth in Need, we've had a lot of staff turnover, we've had a lot of change. And so through that change, there's been some consistency there, which has been great for me.
So a few times there in this, you're talking about ASH and the diversity, equity, inclusion. And so that really, again, you are doing a good job of leading into the next question. So how do you encourage diversity and inclusion within your team organization? And why is that important to have an inclusive work environment?
I think diversity, equity, inclusion, like we have to prioritize this. It is the root of a lot of what we do at Youth in Need. It's definitely part of our mission and values to have a racial equity lens when we're working, but the population that we serve, it's some of the most marginalized communities, some of the most vulnerable communities. And I think we have to have staff that represent that, and we have to allow everyone to have a voice, and we have to lift up the voices of those that haven't had a voice historically. And so I truly believe that everybody brings something to the table. We all have strengths, we all have inherent worth as human beings. And so as a leader, I think it's really important that I get to create time and space intentionally to create opportunities for us to get to know who we are as humans. I think I said earlier, I moved to St. Louis about a decade ago at this point, and the history of this city, of this region, I didn't grow up, really understanding what white privilege was. And I've been on a professional journey and a personal journey for a long time now, but I still have a long way to go. And it wasn't really apparent to me as explicitly. I started, when I got hired on as a school-based therapist at Youth in Need, I worked in North County, and I saw visibly in like the graduation class pictures white flight over the years. And I saw, the impact of what redlining is. And I live in St. Charles County, and, not having access to transportation, things like that the racial disparities that come from systems, if you can't look at it from a systemic oppressive view, it's really hard to think about how working in mental health, how that is going to actually impact your clients on a day-to-day on the micro level. But there is macro things that we just can't avoid. And that's part of that social justice work that we have to do as part of this field. I could talk about that all day.
Well, it's funny. I was going to say that too. Maybe we need to have part 2 of this interview, and it would just, and that's all the diversity, equity, and inclusion. And you're just so articulate. And I had I came from Buffalo, New York, came to St. Louis, and I remember my first semester teaching internship, and students really had struggled to know what it meant to be white. And so again, the white privilege, cultural capital, and creating a safe place to have the dialogue. And there's a lot of similarities with St. Louis and Buffalo with how, again, like you're saying, systems, how highways divide communities, and like how do we again communicate, use it as a lens and repair.
Well, I'm just thinking like full circle moment, having like that therapist background. You mentioned creating space, and like that at the end of the day is a lot of what our job is, just as counselors and therapists in that realm, is just creating space for people. And just that is a skill that is special to where we're coming from.
Yeah, one of the hats I get to wear at Youth in Need, I'm pretty involved in some of our diversity council work, and our right now I'm part of a racial equity work group. And then I get to facilitate racial identity caucusing groups, and I get to really have opportunities to apply this for myself and my own internalized superiority as a white person, but I also get to challenge other people to enter the space in a way that's courageous, because there is a level of discomfort. We don't want to acknowledge, harm of our ancestors, and without that acknowledgement, it's going to be really hard to move forward. And so I enjoy those hats just as much as some of the other hats that I get to wear at Youth in Need. But I think that's one of the things that keeps me here, is that I get to do this work personally and professionally. I'm becoming a better human because of it.
All right. So any last piece, any task, homework, something to reflect on for our listeners?
I think I am someone that loves quotes because the words are already there and then you get to interpret them yourself. But I think one of my favorite quotes is, change is the only constant thing we have in life, and change is permanent. Change is expected and anticipated. And I think my homework or my final thoughts are, we have to be willing to make changes, and believing in the potential of those changes. And I think just, what do you want to see personally, professionally through that change? You have to work at it, and it's really important that you get to do this work.
What a quote for us to think about. Kristi, it's been awesome having you as a guest here on Mentor Moments.
Thanks for having me. Yeah.
Everyone, thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Mentor Moments. Don't forget to leave us a 5-star review on Spotify, Apple, or anywhere that you're listening to this podcast. Be sure to follow us at Mentor Moments on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. And we will see you on the next episode of Mentor Moments.
Are you ready for a career that makes a difference in your community? Consider becoming a counselor with Missouri Vocational Rehabilitation.
Vocational Rehabilitation Counselor helps people who have disabilities find a career path that helps to use their strengths. When people have the supports that they need, it makes anything possible.
I am proud that I'm able to help people change their life and reach for their dream goals.
Discover the change you can make. Visit mvr.mo.gov to get started.